It was a quiet night when I first noticed the ATM. The city had just settled into that strange silence you get when the evening turns late enough for most people to retreat indoors. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you, making every sound seem too loud and every movement feel too deliberate. I had been out for some time, just driving aimlessly, trying to clear my head. The day had been long, filled with too many thoughts, too many decisions, and I needed a break. I didn't care where I went. I didn't even care about the time. But when I saw the dim light of the ATM glowing from across the street, I figured I'd stop, check my balance, maybe grab some cash, and then get back in my car to keep driving. I parked on the side of the road, stepping out into the cool night air. The street was practically empty. Just a few cars parked along the curb, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. It had rained earlier, and now the city felt washed clean. Though the air was thick and heavy, a little too still, it felt like something was waiting, watching. The ATM was older than the others I'd seen around town, its screen slightly cracked, and its body covered with an odd, greyish film, like it hadn't been touched in years. It stood there, illuminated by a flickering street lamp, casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the sidewalk. I felt a strange unease but shrugged it off. It was just an ATM after all. I walked up to it, sliding my card into the slot, my fingers cold against the metal. The screen blinked to life with a faint hum, the bright blue light of the machine filling the night air, waiting for the usual screen to pop up. But then something strange happened. Instead of the usual balance inquiry or withdrawal options, the screen froze for a moment, then flickered. A line of text appeared, distorted at first, then sharpened, the words becoming clearer as if the machine were struggling to communicate. "It's not the money you're after." I blinked. I thought it was a glitch. Maybe someone had tampered with the machine. But the text stayed on the screen, the letters stretching out like they were being typed in real time. "You will regret using this machine." My breath caught in my throat, but I convinced myself it was just a prank, some kind of sick joke. I reached for the cancel button to finish the transaction and leave, but before I could press it, the screen blinked again. "Don't leave, not yet." I pulled my card out quickly, suddenly uneasy. My hands were trembling as I stuffed the card back into my wallet and backed away from the machine. I turned toward my car, but something in my gut told me I wasn't safe, that something wasn't right. The hum of the ATM seemed to linger in the air, vibrating in my chest, as if the machine had left a mark on me. I didn't look back as I got into my car, but I could feel the weight of those words, "Don't leave." Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I drove away, not knowing where I was heading, but the streets felt different now. The shadows on the road seemed too long, too sharp. The streetlights flickered ominously, as if they were warning me to turn around. I didn't, though. I couldn't. Something was pulling me forward, urging me to keep going. And then, like some cruel coincidence, I saw it. Another ATM. This one stood in front of a small, dimly lit corner store. I could see the soft blue glow of the screen even from the distance, calling to me. Something about it felt wrong, like it had appeared just for me. I had to stop. I didn't want to, but I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't make myself drive past it. The decision was made before I could stop myself. I parked and got out of the car, the air now thick with an oppressive stillness. The closer I got to the ATM, the more the world seemed to shrink. The sounds of the night faded away, replaced by the soft, mechanical hum coming from the machine, the hum that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The screen flickered to life, and I stepped forward, drawn to it against my will. The words appeared almost instantly. "You thought you could leave." I froze. My pulse thudded in my ears. I hadn't even touched the machine yet. I hadn't entered my card. How could it know what I was thinking? Before I could move, the screen blinked again. This time, it displayed something more, a picture. It wasn't a normal ATM screen anymore. The image was distorted, the colors warped, but there was no mistaking it. It was a picture of me. It was a photo of me from behind, standing in front of the first ATM. It was grainy and dark, as if taken with a low-quality camera from a distance, but it was unmistakable. Me, standing there, reading the message on the screen. I staggered back, my heart racing. How had it done that? How could the ATM know where I had been, what I had done? I didn't wait for the screen to change again. I turned and fled, rushing back to my car, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The hum of the machine followed me, louder now, pounding in my chest like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I didn't stop driving, but every turn I made, every street I passed, I saw it again. Another ATM. The next one was just around the corner, and the one after that just down the road. They kept appearing, each one seeming older, more decrepit, more threatening. Each one was different, but all of them shared the same thing, the hum, the cold, oppressive hum that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. The sense that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me. Each time I approached an ATM, I found that same message waiting for me. The same eerie, cryptic text that crawled across the screen like it was waiting for me to see it, to absorb it. You can't run. You're trapped. It's already too late. I began to lose track of time, of where I was going. The streets started to blur together, the landmarks growing unfamiliar, as if I had crossed into some parallel world where the rules of reality didn't apply. The further I went, the more the machines multiplied. It was as if they were part of the city now, part of its very bones, waiting to trap anyone who wandered too close. By the time I saw the last one, an ancient machine half buried in a shadowed alley, I was numb. I didn't even feel fear anymore, just a deep, bone-crushing exhaustion. I didn't know what they wanted from me. I didn't know why this was happening, or why I couldn't stop. But one thing was clear. I couldn't leave. Not anymore. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Daniel's car pulled into the almost empty parking lot of a small, nondescript convenience store. The place was quiet, tucked away in a corner of a deserted strip mall. The fluorescent lights above buzzed sporadically, casting a dim and sickly glow over everything. It wasn't the most comforting place at this hour, but Daniel needed cash for an emergency, and his usual ATM was out of order. He hadn't intended to stop here, but the blinking blue light of an ATM across the parking lot caught his attention, glowing faintly in the night. It seemed like the only place open this late in the area. He'd been driving for hours, lost in his thoughts, trying to shake off the fatigue of the day. He hadn't planned on being out this late, but sometimes life didn't give you a choice. His stomach growled as he parked, his thoughts briefly distracted by his hunger. He could grab a snack afterward. But first, cash. The lot was empty aside from a lone car parked near the corner of the building. The faint sound of a radio playing drifted out of the car's cracked windows, but aside from that, everything else was still. The night felt almost suffocating, too quiet. Daniel stepped out of the car, shivering slightly from the unexpected chill of the night air. The sound of his shoes scraping across the pavement echoed unnervingly in the silence. As he made his way toward the ATM, he noticed something strange. The machine was older than the ones he was used to. Its screen was larger, the buttons worn down from use, and though the area seemed well lit, the ATM stood in the shadows, almost like it was hiding from the streetlights. He reached for his wallet and slid his card into the machine, his fingers cold as they moved across the keypad. The screen blinked on. He typed in his number, pressed enter, and waited. But this time, something was wrong. The machine hesitated, then flashed a strange symbol on the screen. It was just a blur at first, like a glitch, but then it began to resolve into something clearer. A triangle surrounded by wavy lines, and within it, an eye. An eye that seemed to stare right back at him. Daniel blinked and pulled his hand back. He could feel his heart rate quicken, but he tried to shake off the unease. It was probably just a malfunction. The ATM was old after all, but the more he stared at the symbol, the more uneasy he felt. It almost felt alive. "Please wait," the machine finally displayed. Daniel rubbed his eyes. The night felt too still, too unnervingly quiet. There were no cars passing by, no sound, just the low hum of the ATM, the soft flicker of its screen. Then the machine flickered again. And this time, the screen didn't just change, it shifted. The triangle was gone, replaced by a message. "Withdraw or stay?" He stared at the screen, the question rattling in his mind. Was that a normal prompt? He had never seen anything like it before. Withdraw or stay? What did that even mean? His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the sound of his own pulse filled his ears. The blinking cursor seemed to mock him, like it was waiting for him to make a choice. He reached out, his finger hovering over the keypad, uncertain. Something felt wrong. The machine felt wrong, but he couldn't explain why. It was just a machine. What choice did he have? He needed cash. He pressed withdraw. The machine clicked and whirred. The sound was distorted, like the gears inside were fighting against themselves. The screen blinked a few times, and then, without warning, the machine began to spit out cash, a stack of bills, one after the other. But there was something wrong about them. The bills weren't ordinary. They were darker than normal, as if they had been stained with something, dirt or something worse. The edges were frayed, the texture rougher than money should feel. They were old, too old. As he reached for the money, the screen blinked again. Take it, or leave it behind. Before he could respond, the temperature around him dropped, the chill settling deep into his bones. His breath came out in visible puffs, despite the relatively warm night air. He looked around. The parking lot was still empty, the only light coming from the flickering streetlights above. But now there was a low hum. The sound was coming from the machine, but it wasn't just the machine anymore. The ground beneath his feet seemed to hum in response, a subtle vibration that crawled up through his soles and into his legs. Something wasn't right. He could feel it deep in his gut. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he couldn't move. His hands were frozen, suspended in mid-air over the stack of bills. "Leave!" The whisper was faint at first, like a distant voice calling from somewhere deep in the shadows. It sent a jolt of fear through his chest, but when he tried to move, his body didn't respond. It felt like something was holding him in place, keeping him from escaping. Then the machine began to malfunction once more. The screen blinked, and in the chaos of static and glitches, words began to form, jumbled but still legible. "You've taken too long." And then something even worse happened. The light around him dimmed. The streetlights went out one by one, plunging the area into an impenetrable darkness, except for the ATM. Its screen began to pulse, casting long, twisted shadows that stretched out across the pavement. Daniel's heart raced in his chest, the panic building in his throat, but he couldn't look away from the machine. The hum grew louder. The air became thick and suffocating, heavy with the sound of breathing. Then the machine beeped again. "You can leave now, but it's too late." Before he could understand what that meant, the temperature plummeted again, and for the briefest of moments, the world around him seemed to distort. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, blackness seeping through the fissures, swallowing the pavement whole. Daniel stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, but he could feel something pulling him back toward the machine. Something dark and ancient was behind it, its presence so overwhelming, so cold, that it felt as though the earth itself had opened up just to swallow him whole. The ground vibrated once more, and then snap. The machine abruptly shut off, leaving Daniel standing alone in the pitch-black parking lot. His body trembled uncontrollably, a cold sweat breaking out over his skin. The hum, the pull, the darkness, it was all gone. He rushed to his car, hands shaking so badly that it took him several attempts to unlock the door. Once inside, he slammed the keys into the ignition and sped out of the parking lot, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't care where he was going, he just needed to get away. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. It was as if the machine had reached into his very soul, branding him, marking him for some unknown fate. He looked into the rearview mirror, expecting to see the dark, empty parking lot behind him. But instead he saw something else, a pair of eyes staring back at him from the shadow of the back seat. Daniel slammed on the brakes, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts, but when he looked again, nothing. The parking lot, the ATM, the shadow, it was all gone. But the fear stayed. And now, every time Daniel sees an ATM, that feeling returns, like the darkness is still waiting for him, just behind the screen. There was no reason for Erica to be driving through this part of town. It was late, past midnight, and the streets were practically empty. The only sound in the car was the faint static of the radio, which had long since stopped playing anything of interest. Her eyes were heavy, the hours of work and the chaos of the day weighing on her, but she kept driving. She needed to clear her head. Her phone had died a few hours ago. The charger was somewhere in the back seat, but she couldn't be bothered to find it. The roads she was on were unfamiliar, winding streets with streetlights spaced far apart, casting long shadows across the pavement. And then, just as her mind started to drift off, she saw it. An ATM. It wasn't particularly new or modern, but there it stood, an odd fixture in the middle of the night. There was no bank nearby, no well-lit store or anything that would explain the machine's location. Just a small, dimly lit parking lot, a few scattered cars, and that lone ATM standing at the edge of a gravel lot, under the sickly yellow glow of a flickering lamp. Erica wasn't sure why she felt drawn to it. She didn't need cash, and she definitely didn't need to be lingering in the middle of nowhere at this hour. But something about the machine. It almost beckoned to her, like it was calling her. And if she was being honest, the fact that it was so out of place only made her more curious. Against her better judgment, she pulled into the lot. The moment she parked, she noticed something strange about the machine. It was old, much older than the sleek, modern ATMs she was used to. The screen was cracked in several places, and the paint on the body of the machine was chipped and faded. But there was something else. A presence. Something in the air shifted as she stepped out of the car, and she shivered involuntarily. The night felt heavier here, the stillness more pronounced. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of a nearby tree, but other than that, the place was eerily silent. Too silent. She tried to shake off the feeling. "It's just an ATM," she muttered to herself. But as Erica approached the machine, a low hum filled the air. It was barely audible at first, like a distant engine, but the sound grew louder the closer she got. It wasn't the usual soft whir of an ATM. This noise felt different, ominous. Without thinking, she inserted her card into the slot. The screen flickered to life. The words "Welcome" appeared in bold letters, but there was an odd delay, like the machine was struggling to respond. Erica waited for the usual prompts: balance, withdrawals, transfers, but nothing appeared. Instead, the words "please wait" flashed across the screen. The hum continued to grow louder, vibrating the ground beneath her feet. She started to feel lightheaded, as though the air was being pulled from her lungs. Suddenly the machine beeped, and the screen flickered again. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" Erica frowned, looking around. There was no one else here. It didn't make sense. This wasn't a bank with a line of customers. This was just her and the ATM. She hesitated, but the urge to withdraw cash was too strong. Something was pushing her forward, and before she could second-guess herself, her fingers moved, pressing the buttons to withdraw $100. The machine accepted her request. The humming grew louder still, vibrating the air, the ground, the walls of her very chest. Then the screen blinked again, but this time it wasn't offering her cash. Instead, it was showing something unsettling. It was a video. The screen displayed an image of Erica. Not the Erica standing in front of the machine, but her, inside the machine. She gasped, stepping back, heart hammering in her chest. She leaned closer to the screen, her face reflected in the cracked surface. Her mouth was dry, her mind racing. What the hell is going on? The video was shaky, almost like it was being filmed by someone hiding just out of view. In the footage, Erica was walking down an empty street, one she'd never seen before. The street was dark, lit only by a few flickering streetlights, but there was a sharp sense of familiarity about it. The voice came next, a low whisper, not from the machine but from the air around her. It was like a soft murmur just on the edge of hearing. "You shouldn't have come here." Erica whipped her head around, but there was no one. The lot was still. The machine was quiet. And yet the words echoed in her ears like they were coming from every direction at once. She tried to pull her card out of the machine, but it was stuck. The slot that should have been empty was now clenched tight around her card, holding it in place. No matter how hard she tugged, it wouldn't budge. The whisper grew louder. "It's too late. You're already inside." Erica's pulse skyrocketed, her breath shallow. Sweat started to bead on her forehead, and she pulled harder at the card. It wouldn't come out. She took a step back, eyes wild, looking for any way to escape, but there was no way out. The ATM was alive. The machine beeped once more, and the screen flashed again, this time showing a countdown. A timer appeared at the top of the screen, ticking down from 60 seconds. "You have 1 minute to leave." The hum intensified, now vibrating through the pavement, through the walls, through her skull. Erica's head began to throb, her vision blurring at the edges. She reached out, desperate to pull her card free, but it was as if the machine had some kind of hold on her. The timer continued to tick. "You've taken too long." The seconds passed by like hours. Her breathing was ragged, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive hum of the machine. And then, when the timer reached 0, the screen blinked once more. Instead of her card being returned, a strange, distorted image appeared, a nightmarish, fleshy figure, shifting and contorting within the glowing screen. Its face was partially obscured, but the shape of its eyes, wide, hollow, stared back at her, emotionless. Erica stumbled backward, her legs weak, and then the screen went black. For a split second she thought she had escaped. But before she could even process what was happening, the lights around her flickered violently and the ATM seemed to pull in on itself, twisting, warping. The image of the creature flickered once more, flashing in rapid succession until the machine shut off completely. Everything went silent. Erica stood there, panting, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. She reached forward, her hand shaking as she tried to pull her card free, but when she looked into the slot, it was gone. Her card, the money, everything had vanished. She glanced around once more, but there was no sign of anything unusual, no monster, no figures hiding in the shadows. But something had changed. As she backed away from the ATM, she realized that her reflection in the glass had changed. The image in the machine didn't match her at all. The woman staring back at her wasn't Erica. She wasn't sure who it was, but the face was wrong, twisted, hollow-eyed, and smiling. She turned and ran. The drive home was a blur. She didn't look back. When Erica finally arrived at her apartment, she locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat down. Her fingers were trembling as she pulled out her phone, hoping the horror of the ATM was just some twisted hallucination. But there was a notification. It was a message. "The Bank of Shadows remembers you." And then, nothing more. Erica couldn't sleep that night. She couldn't even look at an ATM without her hands shaking. Every time she walked past one, she felt eyes watching her, waiting. It wasn't over. Whatever that machine had done to her, it had followed her home, and it would be waiting the next time she needed to withdraw. It was just past 3 a.m. when Jenna found herself driving through the near-empty streets of the city. The roads were slick from the recent rain, and the only sound in the car was the soft hum of the engine. She had left her phone charging at home, her mind too tired to care. The long week at work, the family drama, and the exhausting cycle of everyday life had worn her down. She didn't know why she was still out here. Maybe she just needed to clear her head. Or maybe it was the isolation of the empty streets that seemed to draw her in. Turning down an unfamiliar side road, Jenna spotted an old, solitary ATM at the end of the block. It was perched under a flickering streetlight, tucked away in the corner of a barely visible parking lot. No banker around, no sign of life, just that machine sitting there, glowing faintly in the dark. For some reason, the sight of it made her stop. She parked her car a few feet away, stepping out into the damp, cool air. There was no reason to be here. She didn't need cash. But something about the machine seemed odd, compelling. Her footsteps echoed in the empty lot as she approached the ATM. Its metal frame was rusted, the screen cracked, and the overall appearance made it look like it hadn't been used in years. It's just an old ATM, she thought, though something felt strange about it, like it had been waiting for her. Jenna shrugged off the unease and slid her debit card into the machine. The screen flickered, then lit up with a garbled "Welcome" in bold letters. The text didn't look right, distorted, shaky. "It's just old," she reassured herself, pressing in her PIN. The usual options appeared on the screen: check balance, withdraw, deposit. But then something caught her eye. The machine's display shifted slightly, a new prompt appearing. "Extra funds available. Would you like to withdraw?" Jenna blinked, unsure if she was reading it right. Extra funds? That wasn't something the bank had ever told her about. No notifications, no emails, nothing about some mysterious surplus in her account. She hesitated. Maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe she was too tired to think clearly. But the message was still there, pulsing on the screen, almost like it was waiting for her to say yes. Without thinking too much, she pressed yes. Immediately, the machine whirred, and something inside it seemed to stir. The sound was strange, almost mechanical, like the gears of the machine were struggling to work. Jenna stepped back, her heart starting to race. Then, click. The machine spit out a thick stack of bills, neatly folded. Jenna stared at the money for a moment, her mind racing. It wasn't just any cash. The bills were heavy, thick, and oddly old. They didn't look like anything she had ever seen. Each bill seemed to be in some kind of disrepair, faded, the edges frayed, and sticky. What in the world? She quickly pocketed the bills, feeling a strange guilt gnawing at her stomach, but the desire to get out of there, away from that machine, was too strong. Her fingers fumbled with the money in her pocket as she turned to leave. And then, just as she reached the door of her car, the machine beeped again. "Withdrawal complete. Thank you." Jenna froze. She didn't turn around. She just stood there, her fingers frozen on the car door handle. Her heart was beating faster now, like something was wrong. It wasn't the usual quiet hum of an ATM. This felt different. The air was heavier, and then the screen flickered. "You will return it." Her blood ran cold. Her eyes shot back to the ATM. The words were still there, clear as day, but now they felt like a threat. She stepped away from the car, turning back toward the machine. Return it? The screen had gone black now, completely dark, like the machine was shutting down, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. It was like the whole atmosphere had changed. The light above the ATM flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Jenna's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her. It felt like the air itself was thick with something. Her hands were trembling. Her mind screamed at her to leave, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a mistake. That machine was no longer just a machine. It was watching her, waiting. Then the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It didn't come from the machine, but somehow it felt as if it came from the very air around her. "You took it. You can't leave." Her body went rigid. She spun around, scanning the empty lot, her breath coming faster now. The voice wasn't real. She must be imagining it, right? But then the hum started again, low and mechanical, almost like an engine. The machine flickered to life once more, the screen illuminating with garbled symbols. Then one by one, they rearranged themselves. "You will return it." This time, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Jenna took a few steps back, her pulse thundering in her chest. She had to leave. She had to get away from this thing. The static filled the air again, louder, sharper, almost painful to her ears. And then the machine flashed, too brightly. In the light, she saw it. Her own reflection in the screen. But it wasn't her. The woman staring back at her was a hollow-eyed version of herself. Her mouth was wide, frozen in a silent scream, and her eyes were black, empty. Jenna spun around, her breath coming in ragged gasps. There was no one there, nothing. But the reflection, it wasn't just a reflection. The voice returned, now louder, more insistent. "You took what wasn't yours. It belongs to us now." She didn't wait another second. Without a thought, she sprinted to her car, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own footsteps. She flung open the door and slammed it shut behind her. Her hands were shaking as she started the car. The engine sputtered for a moment, then roared to life. She pulled out of the lot without looking back. As she drove, the sound of the machine's hum still echoed in her ears, mixing with the static. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't fading. It was still there. By the time Jenna made it home, she was drenched in sweat, her hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The money in her pocket felt heavier now. She glanced at it, feeling the bile rise in her throat, but she couldn't bring herself to pull it out. When she reached her front door, she locked it quickly, bolting the locks before collapsing onto the couch. The house was silent. The air felt normal again. But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. The withdrawal was just the beginning. Her heart stopped. And somewhere, deep in the darkness outside her window, she could hear a soft, mechanical hum. A whisper in the night. You will return it.